Are we born into a cosmic conspiracy? Find out on Buzzsaw.
Central Intelligence Agency.
It was described by witnesses as...
Many of you will have heard of the so-called Akashic records. Our guest today, Andrew Bartzis, is a galactic historian who can tap into those at will. He'll be talking with us about the creation of the human race, the origins, and where we're going. So this will be a fascinating interview. Stick around for this. Andrew, thank you for joining us. First of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be on the Buzzsaw interviews. I've been a fan of your interviews for a long time.
Well, thank you. And you know, you're a fascinating individual, and it's great to have you on 12/12, which you say 12/12/2014. This date is a sort of an activation date on the calendar.
That's right. Just like 11/11 was an activation date, 12/12 is an activation date of those of the indigo children, as well as the crystals and the rainbow children. This activation is about their dream world and how deeply connecting they can do during moments of hibernation. We as a human species have a legacy to be able to hibernate, to recollect our dream space and to recollect our personalities, to return to what's called zero balance, the moment in the 0 point in the fetus in mother's womb. And it's those children that are going to begin to recalibrate back to that zero balance. That's what 12/12 signifies.
Well, I mean, certainly the dream time is a fascinating concept because, as many of us have wondered, what a dream's for and where do we go during our dreams, and obviously the issue of astral projection or lucid dreaming. But I think we'll get into that in the course of this discussion, because obviously you're saying recalibrate. The issue is recalibrate to what? What has gone wrong in the course of our history here? And so for that, perhaps we should go back to sort of the origins of the human existence on Earth, because you talk about something that's before the Anunnaki, which many people are familiar with. Zechariah Sitchin's work, right? The ancient Sumerian texts. That interpretation is, oh, humans were created by these sort of gods, Anunnaki, so-called alien gods who came and created humans on Earth. But your story actually says, no, there's actually a much longer, deeper history, and they only recreated us in a sense.
It takes the scale of our history is increased 2,000-fold. That's how much more expression that I bring through the Akashic records. Many people are going to ask, what is the Akashic record? It is a representation of a universal mechanism that records all sentient life's expression, from the most basic one-dimensional to the most highest 10th dimensional spark of life. A planet is a sentient being that creates a crust and a core, much like a hermit crab. And planets do discard their shells and go into other ones. When a planet bonds with an actual shell, it creates the first spark or connection to a universal source to invite life to come and live in DNA skin suits to have experiences in a realm of color. The Akashic record is the most basic recording structure of color and how beings interact with color. Color goes to the 7 rays of color, which is another universal mechanism for light bodies to interact with realities that they manifest and create in conjunction with the planet. The Akashic record and universal mechanism is how we as DNA skin suit incarnating beings have a neutral perspective, which is that of the planet, who is sharing space for life to grow in this universal mechanism that shares the Akashic record on many different scales. We have the Akashic record of this world. That is everything that has gone on, every living being that has ever been entangled with Earth karmically or entangled quantumly is a record here. When a being or a light body leaves, it takes a copy of it and goes somewhere else. Every world has an example of this. Every sun has an example of this. Every galaxy has an example of this. So there's a galactic Akashic record, a universal Akashic record, as well as an individual planetary Akashic record.
The Akashic record. Well, the Akashic record reminds me of the fact that, you know, as we evolve technologies, like, for example, cameras, per se, we are actually echoing or imitating what is already given to us by the universe. You know, so people have had telepathic abilities or abilities to project, you know, astrally. And now we have access to phones and Skype, right? And we can see across great distances. So it's like our physical technology is catching up to that which already exists in the universe. So when we speak of the Akashic record, it seems like, oh yes, there's universal cameras in a sense, right? That they're always recording. And so there is a record that's never going to be lost of these times before we invented cameras and photography and whatnot.
Correct. And another layer that we can look at is each individual being is a light body that may have not existed in this universe before. It may have had another universal existence. And when it comes here, it brings the Akashic record of its total existence compressed into its light body as it immigrates from one universe to another. And when we go from one point to another, we go across the void and we lose an I am present self. And when we lose the I am present self, we aren't an incarnating being or species anymore. We are just sentience with a total volume of information until we cross the next universal barrier. And after that universal barrier, we immigrate to another universe and gain a whole new Akashic record. This is known as the adventure that souls go through. This is why soul families are created in the first place, to literally give this expression of the adventure of travel, to find out what all of this stuff that is going through the universe means, and then how to share it with others who are new to a series of experiences. And the Akashic record is a way for other beings to go, here is a neutral perspective, not polarity, not into positive or negative or any of the other expressions, simply that of the universal mechanisms of quantum observance without entanglement.
So we're not yet at that point of the I am, obviously. We're still coping with certain karmas that have been created in a certain time frame of existence here.
Correct. We are still, as a species, a global species, that is the surface species, and then the inner earth species, still dealing with karma that was created 54 million years ago when a concept of timeline manipulation was introduced here, and people began going back deep into our history to create a brand new first species. So our DNA would look completely different. At the same time, we had shared our DNA to many other galaxies as well as many other universes. And once you share DNA, that is a way for a being to incarnate into a technology to gain access to Akashic record. If a fundamental piece of that DNA is removed, suddenly does not exist in the entire existence of the universe, all those beings whose technology is based off that lose their experience. That's known as an uncreational event that reached out beyond one planet, that affected millions of planets, which actually uncreated the universe. And this is the karma that Earth and 65 other planets are dealing with. How timeline manipulation, timeline genocide, which is a term you'll hear a lot, created vast amounts of karma. So much that the universal law of karma is no longer even going to be used anymore because it was abused so badly.
So let's go back then to sort of the origins, let's say, of Earth, because obviously, as I said, we know from our ancient records the so-called Anunnaki gods and sort of creator gods that came, but before that, what is the origins of the solar system? Where do these souls come from in the beginning?
We'll get to that. I just want to say the Anunnaki are just one little small part in this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And they were lured here to Earth. And so I want to begin with that. So I'm going to start with the creation here of what Earth is. Mm-hmm. Earth is known as a seventh dimensional galactic seed planet. Earth as a being lived in other universes, the other 16 universes that were incarnating in this bubble of universal realities. She was billions of different beings and multiple soul shards until she decided that she was going to do something that the universe had never done before. There were thousands of others in other universes who wanted to make a seed planet. What that is a planet that is connected to the universe's mind and its dreaming mind. What that means is you can see new planets and new places come into existence as the universe expands. One of the common things of people to do is to go to the end of the universe and literally wait for it to begin to expand and whole new life is created. What Earth did is it centralized itself and it built a housing or a shell in conjunction with millions and millions of other beings in this universe when it was still a non-free-willed universe. That means its rules and its structure were not completely 100% free will. Everything was based off of a universal clock expression that determined when karmic interaction could happen and could happen. There were very greased wheels to make sure everything happened right. And Earth's purpose was, if you're going to immigrate whole new life to a universe, you're going to need to seed new worlds. You're going to need trillions upon trillions of trees. You're going to need billions upon billions of fish and microorganisms. And Earth was that concept. Earth has the ability to reach out into the dreaming minds of planets yet uncreated, but it also has special items on its surface called womb chakras, W-O-M-B. Mm-hmm. And these womb chakras are connected to the planet's heart and mind, so that on a universal level, those beings who live above those womb chakras will create DNA skin suits or inhabitable objects that energy can co-create with, that alters the reality of other planets to be in abundance, to be in balance with that of the planet. So you can literally create a little bubble of reality in these womb chakras and have an infinite amount of space to grow trees, plants, and animals, and then psychically teleport them from that womb chakra and directly graft them onto a blank Akashic record world. Those are those shells that I told you about. And then a spark of life comes in, and that's the planetary spark. And then that planetary spark invites others to come in. And that is where Earth, its special ability was to seed not just one planet, but billions of planets, because of the trillions of beings that live within Earth as physical bodies or energy bodies, who are part of the universal matrix. Earth came out, it was doing its galactic seed planet process, and then war was introduced to another galaxy. And it was its own little bubble galaxy. And a series of decisions were made at the prime creator level to allow our universe to go from non-free-willed, free-willed at exactly one moment in universal history. That created a vacuum where everything got an update at the light body, that there was no longer pure order within this universe, that it was a 100% free will universe, and that any being that wanted to immigrate from any other universe simply needed to cross the void of the I Am Presence. This had never been done in this other 16 universes of creation. So this was going to be a roller coaster of a brand new universe, and things were going to happen that had never been seen before. And there were trillions upon trillions of beings who migrated from other universes to get to Earth. Because at that point, Earth was the best of the best of the best place where you could go have a planetary existence. The bodies that we had, the DNAs that we had, experienced all 7 colors. The spiritual bodies we had 9 layers of experience. We had 63 ways to experience the ever-present moment-to-moment creation. And this created competition with other races. And those races mass immigrated here. Earth went from 2 trillion beings living on it to 50 trillion beings living on it, to 500 trillion beings living on it. And this is where timeline genocide, in first competition of the first expression of free will, came in, which caused the very first uncreational event, which put Earth at the center of karmic generation. So
basically the story is that Earth is ultimately the progenitor of life across the universe. It actually is a source planet for life.
No.
Because you said it was seeding planets across the universe, no?
No, it's the individual sovereign free will being who creates the individual piece, who becomes the source creator themselves here on Earth, because they each have an individual infinite space.
So you're saying it's the beings on Earth that were the progenitors.
Yes.
And when you say 500 trillion beings, we're not talking about human forms. I mean, what type of, it was a mixture of, would it be anything recognizable to today's eyes if we were to look at it?
There is what's known as residual image of the soul. And we do look like what they look like then, but not in scale, not in size, not in luminescence. They were 7th dimensional beings then who had physical bodies to interact with the Earth, because that was the nature of their technology. The reason the experience was so different here was because of the bodies. The body was the machine to interact with the machine that is Earth. It is a quantum psychic machine. That's what Earth is. And its solar system that it exists in modifies what beings on Earth can do. After the first uncreational event, there was a creational event that came back, and there were beings who had lost their experience all over the universe, who needed to immigrate to Earth to figure out how they could get their experience back, because the laws of karma. At that point, war was introduced to the whole universe, and species began in competition. This is that concept that light and dark has taken over, that light must battle dark and dark must battle light, which we are still facing now in our history.
Of course. And what was the origin then of this war? You said it came from a different universe or a different galaxy.
Different galaxy within this universe, in a very sub-bubble, because they wanted to know, if you suddenly gave everyone free will, what would the level of competition be? At what layers would the universal mechanisms break down, and what would other universal beings have to do to come in and protect their boundaries of their universe? This was a gigantic universal experiment.
And when we say they, are we talking about what we would call God? Source
Beings who hold space to create a universe. And then a universe has a source solar system, that a central solar system, where they invite other source beings or other beings to come in and create planets, or the initial infrastructure that expands out and out and out, that now begins its own universal scale of counting.
So in the course of the wars that were begun, I mean, we're talking millions of years ago at this point in Earth.
This would have been about 11 billion years ago.
11 billion years ago. But the Earth would not be as material as it is now. We're talking about a different dimension of...
It would have been 10,000 times bigger than it is now. Earth has shrunk in size. Mm-hmm. It is now a third density planet. It has gone from seventh density to third.
So in the course of these wars, ultimately we get to the point of the first, what we would consider, I guess, modern civilization being Lemuria, right? I mean, that's sort of the closest to where we are now in terms of civilizations.
There were civilizations before that, because Earth was a created planet. The structure, the superstructure that the spark of Earth invested into was already created. So there was no first species of Earth, no naturally generated Darwinian expression of a generated species. Beings traveled from other places, created energy bodies that manifested physical bodies through technology, and began life there, just as if you move from one house to another. And then when the first offspring of Earth created the first ancestors, it allowed Earth to be a part of solar system commerce, which would be how one solar system has thinkers, atheists, mathematicians, another has warriors, this and this, and they may need to trade. There is a universal quantum entanglement that all planets, all stars, and all solar system can trade amongst each other, those who are looking for the best possible experience. Earth was caught in this center of everyone that wanted to come here. And there needed to be a common skin suit so that people could begin to share experiences. And what was created would be an expression of the very first Lemurian that reaches into about 67 million years ago. Before that, we would have been 1,000 shapes, 1 trillion sizes, shape-shifting. Your physical shape wouldn't have been nothing. It was just how you interacted with the technology of Earth. And as the immigration got here bigger, and war came closer and closer, and people became unified around defending this planet, and a whole new concept of what offense was, what defense, what this concept of chess could be, they created common skin suits, like a war suit, a thinker suit, a healer suit, so on and so forth. And this created the first foundational structures for DNA memories, which is if you passed on a life and you came back for the astral world, you could create DNA lineage technology. So you could leave memories in the body over and over and over again. And the Lemurians were the initial creators of this technology, DNA skin suit technology, that allowed you to save all of your previous past lifetimes in a single engineered biomechanical suit that could self-procreate from spark.
So at this point, basically, the lifespan is much longer than a normal Earth time, because you obviously are absorbing the memories. But what happens upon death? Do you
There
lose
was
that?
not a normal Earth time then. We were still counting universal time then. We are on fraud time here in our planet since they hijacked our belief systems 54 million years ago. This is the beginning of when time, which time is just a social agreement among sentient beings. And then there's a way for sentient beings to gauge time through the reflection of the Akashic record when you go from the scale of the planet to the scale of the solar system, or the scale of the solar system to the galaxy, and that's how souls count time. The I am presence in DNA skin suit technology can be fooled with time based off of belief. And this is what was exactly done to different structures within the society, the warriors, the this, the that. People began to lose count of time because they had literally lost their experience, or other beings with their DNA that was shared lost their experience, and there became a common way of trying to find out in time, how can you fix all these lost experiences? And this began the abuse of time travel, where these new free-willed beings didn't realize that if you did one thing in the past, that it could deeply affect the future of some other species that is yet in even existence.
You said 54 million years ago. We're still talking about a time when dinosaurs would have been interacting with these Lemurians as well, no? What we
Correct.
call dinosaurs?
They would have been skin suits that other spirits would have come into, and they would just, a dinosaur, I mean, we don't, our science doesn't allow to believe it, but they would have been just as psychic entities as us. An example, a brontosaurus is one of the most powerful psychic entities ever. It was highly sought after. If you had a pod of brontosauruses on your planet, you could defend your world from reality invasion. It is this skin suit that allows interaction with the planet to make direct elemental manifestation. And if you need to defend a planet, you have this giant brontosaurus skin suit that has dozens of other psychics that are constantly aiding it and protecting it. It can generate massive amounts of elemental energy as a psychic nature and focus it in a protective shield around an area. So many of these skin suits that we call dinosaurs were actually ways, just technology that the planet was usually used to defending itself from reality invasion. It is not about boots on the ground. It's about understanding getting a spark into a skin suit and creating revolt within it, so you can create portals for more of sparks to come in and overbreed what is there.
So this, I mean, the wars that we're talking about at this point, these negative factions that you're referring to, does this pertain to so-called reptilians of Alpha Draconis, for example, or
they would have come later in this structure because we're only dealing with one timeline genocide. We actually have 4, and we're existing on a 5th non-paradox timeline right now. So there were 4 uncreational events that created a paradox. And there were 66 planets that were the prime offenders of timeline creating and purposely creating timeline genocide. 928,000 years ago, on what we exist, this timeline right now, the Galactic Ascension machine was formed by galactic and universal beings who needed to clean up timeline pollution. So everything that had karma was now going to immigrate to one single solar system with one single sun, and each planet would have one common DNA skin suit so everything can incarnate, and all karma can begin to be resolved in this quantum machine that is designed to break all beings down that have karma from the non-free-willed and free-willed universe into a sovereign I am spark expression. It is to grind the 7th dimensional out of you into the most basic spark. Are you ready to be a sovereign free will being in a 100% sovereign free will universe and a 100% sovereign free will planet? Are you ready to co-create in neutrality so you can expand in polarity and learn what free will is at all of its levels?
And so that's the journey that we're on currently, to become
Correct.
sovereign
The
free will
Alpha
beings.
Draconians would have been brought in directly because they were the ones that nurtured in the War Galaxy war at a very advanced level. They were just held back in the Earth perspective because what I call domination and control didn't just come to Earth. It went to hundreds of galaxies, into thousands of worlds, and there were these creator God beings in ego who said, I have free will, I have this technology, here's this blank planet, I'll bring a soul in, and all these beings that are incarnating on it, I can start taxing their energy, storing it in the center of the planet, send technology to the planet, remove it, and then assemble it all in one area to create some greater piece of quantum machinery. That's what the Anunnaki are. It was about sapping our psychic spiritual energy and bringing it to another area and making a galactic psychic farm so they could harvest a whole bunch of stuff so that they can move planets, so they can move solar systems, and make perfect reality bubble environments.
So let's get back to our current timeline so we can keep, understand as much of a linear sense as we can where we're coming out of. The consequence of the conflict between dark and light, or let's say the wars of Lemuria, ultimately, is that what leads to destruction of so-called the dinosaurs, what we call them, the great comet that hit the Earth and led to this mass extinction? Is that
there was no great comet? That is a falsity. We'll learn that about 85 to 95% of our history is absolute lies. We'll learn a whole bunch of things. The dinosaurs did not go extinct from that. We exist on 4 simultaneous paradoxes. So I have to give a quick understanding. 54 million years ago is where timeline genocide was created. That means there was no first, there was no middle, there was no end. We were all simultaneously existing in time. So we had no anchorage. Without an anchorage for a sentience, what is the dinosaurs, what is Lemuria, all blends into one big thing with no linear way to understand it as a being. Until the Galactic Ascension machine was created separately of the paradoxes, which put an anchorage, which put a way for all other paradoxes to have resolution. And that resolution leads into why light and dark fight from the very beginning. It is the leftover programming that we had as a non-free-willed universe. And since the machine was designed to show us free will at all levels, it became a massive competition here on Earth to see who would be the best of the best, to see whose teachings from other galaxies or universe would make it through this massive spiritual grinding machine that was designed to break people down to the most basic soul shard parts so they could figure out what free will is. Light and dark battle because we've been told it's battle. You know, I talk about war, but it's a belief war. We live in a world of 100% propaganda right now. You look at Ferguson, there is not a truth being told on any of those news medias. You know, there's not a truth being told about what's going on in Ukraine. There's not a truth being told anywhere in our world that has mainstream media.
Right.
But mainstream media didn't exist 150 years ago. It was only created so that a whole species would come under a single set of perspectives during a time of great change that our ancestors projected into our belief system to make an end date to an endless machine. We had been locked in an endless cycle of repeating karma because we had created an infinite amount of karma. But once finite beings anchored in time, the other paradoxes where we did things that were very beneficial for karma were then transferred to this final timeline of existence, where what's called a graduation timeline. You know, when we look at the mechanics of how a planet is set up, for timeline genocide to exist, all of the ancestors were disconnected. When ancestors are disconnected, you cannot incarnate on a planet. It loses your connections to its soul codes. Soul codes are what a soul has when it travels from planet to planet, star to star. It says where it's been and what it's done. The very language that we used is based in soul codes.
So, okay, slow it down. So basically, the machine you're talking about, the machine that's programmed, is this like a matrix type of machine that we're dealing with?
It's
robotic
a
thing, or is it
psychic quantum machine that is using part of the DNA lineage technology, which is our dreaming bodies, to share dream space separately than we would normally share dream space than the Earth. There is a piece of technology that generates a dimensional rift or a field generator that shows another option to dream naturally in the North Pole with the dreaming mind of Earth from wherever you are on the planet, or to dream with this technology which is linked into your ports, your buildings, which I call sacred geometry buildings and infrastructure. The very things that were created by the Masons thousands of years ago, the pyramids, the very roadways and power stations that we use are all sacred geometry. And that technology of belief keeps us dreaming in the system and not with our natural, sovereign, neutral witness, the planet, which is the generator of the Akashic record. That is how different of our experiences are.
Yeah.
Natural experience to fraud experience, fraud time that we live on now.
Yeah, indeed. I've heard that there are about, in the last few years, about 3,000 of the sacred sites of the planet have been cut down to about less than 100 in terms of being co-opted by, again, dark energies. I mean, how does that work? How does a site get taken over and utilized, incorporated into the matrix that you're speaking of control of accepted belief systems?
Okay, so let's look at what the pyramids are. There is a common belief the propaganda has put up that says the pyramids were built by slaves and that there's no esoteric value to them other than the burial rituals that were done around that. I know that they're not. I know because I went and looked in the Akashic record to find out how old they were. To me, they are markers in time. So beings that are lost in time, that have lost their experience, can find a way to get back into time and begin to become an incarnating being and not a reincarnating being. You know, that may seem deep, but if you've lost time as a soul, how do you start it again?
Well, so that's an interesting question. An incarnating being as opposed to a reincarnating being, what would be the difference? I mean, I would assume that all of us, regardless of, we're not born here for the first time. We've all have been on this planet. As you said, you have to incarnate the planet in order to exist, in order to learn the codes, in order to get DNA sequencing, you have to incarnate into the planet, right? Mm-hmm. So each of us has been born here before. This is not our first time around.
So what happened was that, just as I said, there's the natural dreaming with Earth, and then there's the sacred geometry. When you incarnate here, after a while, you live with the false for so long, you die with the false. This is called false light technology. This is where off-world beings began to manipulate our belief system at the light body level. Literally the way we perceive history, the way we perceive time. I call these perception deception filters. And they're installed into us to make us look the opposite way instead of the inner way. It's that external belief versus the internal. At every layer, our reality has been hijacked from us as much as 900,000 years ago. That is how long, as souls, we have not been anchored. So a reincarnating being is one who has been trapped in resolution of karma, because that's what the machine's purpose is. And they have the tough lifetimes. They have the war lifetimes. They have the prostitution lifetimes. They have the drug lifetimes. They have the lifetimes as the senators and the saints and so on and so forth, because they're resolving those belief systems. The false light beings can literally create false light tunnels where when a person dies in a sacred geometry infrastructure or building, instead of the natural ancestors coming and taken to their astral world for a life review, a piece of technology broadcasts a signal at them, and they're now disconnected from their body, and their energy body focuses on that. And all of a sudden, they are trapped in the technology. And that technology can read their light body and give them a false light review. They're thinking they're having a life review, and it's not. It's maybe 10% of it, and then immediately they're back into a fetus with the same spiritual contracts that they left with.
So basically, they never worked off the karma that they had thought they had worked off because they've been tricked. Now, according to the Wingmakers website and the Dr. Neruda interview, the Anunnaki are responsible for this false light because they were involved in creating this current human body, and the idea of Anu basically is the name for the false god, whatever you want to call it. Anu basically created this false belief system and the idea of different religions that ultimately, has separated us from the universal, true God, source God. And Marduk and Anu are basically the main responsible parties behind this creation of this false belief system and brainwashing of the modern human. Is that in sync with what you see?
It is in sync, except it wasn't the Anunnaki that created it. The Anunnaki were also lured here by false light technology, by beings who have been on Earth since just after it was created as a seventh dimensional galactic seed planet. These are known as the prime 15 multidimensional beings. These are the ones that are literally challenging the universe and the galaxy to become prime creators within inside it. It is a battle at the highest level of free will. And the beings that were light and dark have been following out their passions of light and dark since before Earth was created. These 15 multidimensional beings have purposely created an incendiary relationship between light and dark on Earth. And light will own Earth for a while, then the dark will come in and conquer. And these beings that live on Earth at one point were 40% of our breeding population. They weren't just one. They were such giant energy beings, they couldn't live in one skin suit. They needed thousands or millions. And the forces of light and dark did not understand at how much level the reality had been hijacked. And then they came in and they were literally able to hijack the reality of very powerful light and dark entities to manipulate them into battling for other planets in other places.
So the 15 beings you're talking about, these are essentially the real head of the Illuminati, the real
Correct.
lords of the dark.
These are the ones that have been manipulating
darkness.
Everything. Correct. They are the main 200 families that are breeding groups for the ones that are the final controlees.
Now these 15 beings, are they what you call them archons, I think? Or
Archons are something they brought in to be managers in the astral world of false light technology.
So what are the 15 beings themselves? Are they alien beings to this planet? Are they?
No, they were here during the creation of our just after the creation of our universe. There was the first, second, and third opening of the immigration doors into this universe. And those multidimensional beings, 4 of them represent the 3rd generation of immigrants, and the rest of them represent the 7th generation of universal immigrants. So that's how old they are. So they did experiences in other universes, and when they came here, they sat in non-free willed and just expressed what they could until this universe turned free will suddenly, out of nowhere. Everyone got, and they decided they were going to go and have fun. I call it the kids on the coke binge, because quite literally they were manipulating the universal rules of light and dark and making light and dark fight in ways that they had never done before. And it created zealots for the first time. And this is why this concept of angels versus demons is so prevalent in our history.
So they are what we call the fallen angels. These 15 rebels.
They're the ones that created the story for angels to even fall in the first place, because they couldn't fall before, because there was never a history of them doing it before. It was all about belief, and they created universal belief systems that changed universal beings based off of false light technology. So
these beings, you're saying 15 of them, and they basically rule the leading families of the planet. Do they actually incarnate?
As well as the leading families of thousands of other planets.
But do they incarnate into those bodies? I mean, could you ever look at this person and say,
yes,
this is actually not a human being?
No, he's a human DNA skin suit with a soul spark in it, or a soul shard in it. And these beings are not one soul shard. They're too big. They could be billions or millions of soul shards. For an example, they're the being that represents the Rothschilds. That's one being, but it's actually about 1,300,000 different people make up that Rothschild being. And that's what makes the infrastructure of how the Rothschild family and breeding groups work as a unit so protected. And then you have all the other families. You have another multidimensional being that may be about 4 million people. Then you have another one that's about 18 million people. But its purpose is to take over the militaries. That's why its 18 million soul shards are spread throughout the militaries of the world.
Well, that brings up the quote to Jesus, "I am Legion."
Yes, exactly.
Now, I mean, just speaking of bloodlines, I mean, again, this Book of Enoch talks about the fallen ones basically introducing warfare, introducing also the arts of agriculture and the esoteric arts, astrology, sorcery, all kinds of things. So both positive and negative. But it also talks about the interbreeding of these beings with earth women to create giants, right? Is that, or Nephilim, so-called? Is that basically, is this the sort of story that's a metaphor for what you're talking about?
The Nephilim is just one representation for what I call the divinity path, where beings of mass manipulation became aware of the 15 multidimensional beings here on Earth and they began a long-term soul chess game to see who could mass incarnate on the planet and take over the breeding groups. Again, it was never about physical technology and boots on the ground. As long as you own the astral worlds and the breeding groups, that world is yours for an infinite amount of time until something can outbreed you on the planet. So these other manipulating beings, who were both light and dark, just decided for a while that they were going to have a truce and work together. So the light and the dark created a brand new neutral option in conjunction with the planet Earth so that they can come here and root out the multidimensional beings. These multidimensional beings were well prepared for that. That is where they began manipulating other planets in domination and control, where they gave them timeline technology and then inserted them into the dark or light agendas, prop situations that was going on, and it created mass rebellion there. That mass rebellion also created a mass rebellion here on Earth, where rebellious souls decided to come in on the divinity path to shed off control of the multidimensional beings, where you could break the rules of reality that had been hijacked over many millions of years. This would have been known as the Mahabharata.
Mm-hmm. The Indian text.
The Indian text, where they talk about the ships that were flying, the giant fortresses, whole lands being leveled with technology. That is the divinity path wars. It's not just the Nephilim. It's thousands of different examples spread throughout the entire indigenous world, spread over many millions of years, where there was a society known as the Lemurians and the Atlanteans, who had 3 raises and 3 falls. But the Lemurians and the Atlanteans are just another representation of time travelers who had lost their experience during the first, second, third, or fourth timeline genocide, and they had no ancestors on the earth. And without ancestors, you cannot be an incarnating being. You can only be stuck in false light reincarnation. So you had an astral world full of all these beings who were trying to create ways to get in. And the divinity path of those beings who figured out how to break the rules and to come in here and do things that changed everything for a short period of time.
Now, you say genocide against certain lineage, right, a bloodline, but
soul families.
A soul family, but doesn't that also affect? I mean, I can only incarnate into this body and DNA based upon the soul and the DNA are basically very integrally linked. It seems, right? I can't just incarnate into any body. It has to be particular in terms of the lineage. Nope. The DNA? No?
Anything. The system of domination, control, and the archons purposely put people in the absolute wrong DNA skin suit, in skin suits that have lots of ancestral karma attached to them, so that they get stuck in crappy lives.
I see. So they were tricked into it.
And our goal is to become incarnating, so that we choose at a moment of spark a mother and father who have DNA skin suits that are very compatible to our light bodies. It is the natural way of procreation amongst our species, instead of the unnatural way that we deal with now, where you come out of the womb, you have your umbilical cord cut off, you're slapped in the ass, given 22 injections and stuck in an incubator to bond with acrylic before you bond with the heart of your mother. The umbilical cord can stay attached for 4 days. Okay? In past history, the woman was up and walking with the umbilical cord attached and the baby upon their heart. Why? Because they were creating a bioelectric field that there was outside of the embryonic sac, and that baby was getting used to this reality from an infinite astral world. Mm-hmm. It was a massive psychic resonating being. And when a mother and father come in that natural way of bondage and union, that time that the child is growing, they're imprinting on it all of its ancestral understandings. That is how we become immortal beings inside our DNA skin suit technology.
How do you say immortal in the sense that our bodies don't die, or that we carry over the consciousness from generation to generation?
Correct. In DNA lineage technology, correct.
Now, is this what the Egyptians, I mean, I always try to figure out where the Egyptians fit into this, because they're obviously a very interesting people that seems to be coming out of the Atlantean time period, and they indicate, you know, even though they didn't build the pyramids, that they had a certain understanding of how to work within them, right? And where do the Egyptians fit into this in terms of their understanding? Were
They understood the quantum psychic machines that the pyramids were. They had a different belief system. They understood the DNA lineage technology, in which when you died, you went to the astral world. As long as you weren't taken over by false light, you could make it to your ancestral astral world, change your spiritual contracts with Earth, and then come back into a DNA lineage that has your memories already in it, like something you've lived in before. Because every DNA lineage out there now, there's about 285,000 different existing lineages right now. And each lineage has a complete and total record of everybody who was your mother and father before you, mother and father before them, all the way back to the very beginning of our fraud time. So there are some lineages that have way more experiences of other beings and very little of your experience. So if you come into a DNA lineage that has your experiences, the vast majority of them, plus your mothers and fathers, you have access to all of them.
Right. Now these 15, how do we call them? What do you call them, fallen? I mean, they're not call them fallen angels.
They created the soup so angels could be fallen beings.
They created the soup or the suit?
The soup.
The soup. These beings, did they, I mean, I would assume they were the pharaohs' families of Egypt, they were the rulers of Babylon, they were the heads of the Roman Empire. I mean, is this how they've incarnated?
They were the ones who figured out when they died and they were born back into a lineage that by the time they were 2, 3, or 4 years old, they had 10% of their past lives that can fluently talk. By the time they were 8 or 9, they had 40% of all of their past lives of who they were. By the time they were 20, they had massive amounts of psychic skills and talents because they understood who they were before. They could emanate light from within.
So it seems to me that these 15 families that you're talking about, the interdimensional beings that are ruling things, they would have incarnated into the bloodlines of the pharaohs of Egypt, into the rulers of Babylon, the Romans. Is that correct? They would have basically been the
dragon
pharaohs?
Families, the Mesoamerican families, the Incans, the Aztecs, the Olmecs, the Toltecs, the Algonquin, the Alaskan, so on and so forth. Wherever there would have been indigenous culture that was at the point of creating cities, they would have come in with DNA light body technology to teach them how to shape and alter the land so great abundance would come, so that they would worship the local deities and beings at the local level, because they knew ultimately other beings were going to come in from an external source and say, worship me, and that was the battle for belief system. So the multidimensional beings prepped all of the indigenous societies to take on the fraud that they were giving. And the actual people like the Egyptians, their level of fraud would have been at the highest level of hijacking, like the Ptolemies. There would have been a massive battle, off-world battle, to take control of that DNA lineage by forcing walk-ins into them, dark rituals, so on and so forth, because they were the ones that were holding the contracts for all belief system, because it was a cult of personality, hierarchical divinity path, displaying power through the projection of pyramids that were anchors in time.
Okay, now talking about the soul contracts, you're saying that they hold the soul contracts, meaning that when someone has sold their soul to
let's
an
not
entity,
use soul. Let's break it down even simple. Everything is contracts. When you work with a cult of personality, you're giving tacit consent for it to take your worship energy and do whatever it wants with in unawareness. And that's what we are functioning in right now. Every 4 years we vote and give tacit consent for 505 people to determine the quality of our life, and we have no input other than that one vote.
But again, this goes back now to, let's say, Egypt, the Egyptian civilization, where they became the pharaohs of Egypt.
The Babylonian business plan, yes.
Now, what was that? What was the nature of that relationship? Because are Egypt and Babylon, they seem to have been either antagonistic to each other to a certain extent, or are they rivals in any way, or is this ultimately the same bloodline?
This is when the multidimensional beings understood that Earth was not a single bubble of shared reality. It was thousands upon thousands. And at that point, when the Egyptians, about 15,000 years ago, there would have been about 25,000 individual bubbles of reality. We have continents that are considered, their own space, but in fact, you had these bubbles of reality that had huge volumes of space in it that were completely disconnected from any other belief system. And it's the Egyptians that figured out how to go from one bubble of reality to the other. And the Babylonians were considered the off-worlders, where the Egyptians would be considered the indigenous on-worlders working with the multidimensional beings. So you had thousands of different realities, some working with the off-worlders, some working with the multidimensional beings, and then other bubbles reality that were trying to stay neutral and only working with the Earth or the elements of Earth, such as the dragon energies or the different elemental energies that existed in the ocean, which were a total separate bubble of reality than Earth sentient expression entangled with off-world sentient expression trying to resolve karma in a 3D matrix.
So basically, the off-world entities, are we talking about, again, like star systems like Orion, Pleiadian?
Pleiadian, Arcturian, Syrian, Anunnaki, Govoran, Aphoran, Etherian, 10,500 plus races are directly invested into our history.
And the interest has always been what? To experience the free will existence of what it is to be on Earth, just to mine soul, to mine DNA for soul codes. I mean, is that what we're doing?
All of that is a part of it, but it's really about being here at the end.
At the end.
At the end, when all karma is resolved, and karma on a universal scale is no longer even used as a universal law. Karma itself is coming to end as a way for contractual exchange. Debt will no longer be, karma can no longer be used as ancestral debt in lineage technology, because that is what created this entire uncreational mess and hierarchical order that we are in right now.
Well, that's what it seems to me, that if you want to create a metaphor for the soul contracts, you look at the banking system, right? This monetary system that was created by these families, right? The banking families of Europe, and how we've all been ensnared into these debt traps we can never escape from, because it's all paper money anyway. We don't own anything.
Vehicles of belief to steal energy from you, so when you die, you are more likely to go to false light technology, because the false light technology is going to broadcast a frequency of what your debt in that debt vehicle is. And
so this is all the banking structures that were created in Babylon or Egypt, or is it both?
Originally in Babylon, because they needed to imprint onto the light body that was incarnating into DNA servitude, and to take on a number. Once you took on a number as cattle, you became an overall part of chattel, C-H-A-T-T-L-E. Once you were chattel, you were part of the king's ownership, and you had a stamped number that you approved of on the soul layer. That was your spiritual contract, once you agreed to be chattel for a cult of personality.
And exactly, and that's what so-called Jehovah, or the Jewish tradition, was warning against when it says, don't worship these false idols, don't give your energy to these cults of personality. So now, is this Jehovah character a sort of another alien being, or what does this figure in?
Another alien being, and he's not exactly a good guy either. He was a zealot, an absolute zealot that came in and did absolutely destructive things, because false light beings had inserted things that were even more destructive. It's like when you have a giant forest fire, you have to sacrifice and backburn certain areas. That's what Jehovah was.
Well, I've heard of, for example, Baphomet, I heard, is a being that exists on a different dimension or a different astral plane. And is he a created being as well by this false light technology?
Any name that has come out of the Bible, the Torah, the Gnosticisms, any of those things was created in falsities, because there were beings manipulating time, manipulating history, manipulating the writers who rewrote the history, manipulating the readers who read each history through each generation, so that a new version of it came out that was never anything associated to the truth.
So even the angels, Gabriel, Michael, I mean, are these also false beings, or are they?
They are false names. Their names have been manipulated. The signature frequency of angelic beings still exists here. Their belief of what they are, the perception of what they are and can do, have been altered in time so much that our light bodies cannot anchor what an angel is supposed to do naturally in this reality.
Which was what? What was the relationship to angels?
To be a connection, so when a soul spark was incarnating into a fetus, that there would be no interference. That's the purpose of angelic beings when living in a physical world, an astral world with a physical world. When they are just in the astral world, they are the ones that escort energetically beings from one planet to one new solar system without the use of technology. Why do they escort? Because light and dark are constantly in battle, and oftentimes the dark wants to capture a light soul and then bring it into a dark expression, because they can still use that at free will at the angelic level.
Just to finish off with the idea of the royal lineages, bloodlines. Now, obviously, we're at a point when most of the royal families have been overthrown, except for the British crown being a very prominent ruler still. And people like David Icke allege that this family is actually reptilian in terms of their ancestry. Is that correct, or are they part of this 15 interdimensional beings?
They're part of the 15 interdimensional beings, but the highest layer of the natural cloning has been done. It's called breeding groups. Certain DNA lineages their light bodies have been abused so much that they can come in and they can do rituals during the birthing process or technological scenarios where the fetus DNA can be altered and a different light body will come in, or a dual light body will come in, which allows draconian possession. That's when you see the eyes turn or the features change or the general reality around the person is breaking down. At any general level of the royal family, they are just like super soldiers. They have been taken over. The reality's been broken down. There's dozens of different personalities in them because they are the feature that the propaganda must use to maintain propaganda sublines and substories. Because if you remove the royals from a substory of history, we are going to look for what? In that vacuum of not believing in them anymore. Well, so those people are 100% controlled, just like the super soldier scenario. They've been mentally and spiritually broken down over thousands of generations.
But it does seem that there is a natural impetus for royalty upon the earth, but it's supposed to be in conjunction with its own family, its own soul family within a certain location of the planet, and that's sort of been hijacked. That's what the royals stand for. They're a German blood group that's been brought onto the British throne, and they may not even be legitimate, even if there was a legitimacy in the first place. But even their own, the legitimacy is in question now. But the point being that it sort of usurped the idea of royalty as something that is connected to its own people, right?
Correct. And then you have to realize that the royalty realized, because they could incarnate over and over again in the same lineage, it wasn't about the power of the now that you could project. It's the power you could project into the future to your future ancestors. So that's what these royals are, beings that have been practicing how to plan 1,000 lives ahead of time, or 1,000, 5,000 lives ahead of time. Me, to get here, to be a galactic historian, I planned 10,000 lifetimes in advance. Every lifetime I planned out to make sure I could be here in this free-willed moment as an I am presence, learning all the skill sets that I had so I could do this, so I could access my DNA wisdom to explain what chattel and what cattle is, what the Babylonian business plan, what galactic ascension machine is, why souls are going through reincarnation and not incarnation.
But don't you have to make deals in that structure? In the structure of the reality that we're dealing with, the false light, don't we have to make deals and contracts in order to incarnate?
Because that's like going to a banker and saying, I have $1, will you hold that $1 for me? And the banker says, if you want the dollar back, it's $1.01.
Right.
You don't have to work in their system. You can create your own system. We are individual bubbles of reality of beings. The final true teaching of the universal source of sovereignty is, what does it take to generate sacred space in yourself so that your heart creates a bubble around you that is no longer sharing domination and control's rules that have been pressed on you from birth and pre-birth and other lifetimes.
And that seems to be where we're going at this point in time, right? The end of our karmic debts, so-called, and the beginning of a sovereignty, of a sovereign being. Now, is that, we're talking about one being, that the unified humanity concept, or is it each of us going to find our sovereignty and sort of find our own separate universe or reality, become creators of that?
It's an experience of unity, and everyone is going to experience unity difference. Because we live in an installed, hijacked, hierarchical Babylonian business plan world, we need to reverse engineer hierarchical order in ourselves. And when we do that, we come to what unity can be as an individual sovereign energy bubble of a reality being who does not agree to the rules of karma and does not agree to the dirty energy rules that our world works by. We're able to create a belief system that fortifies our reality and then share it with others who have a common belief of fortifying their reality enough so that the energy of debt is constantly not being projected at them. Unity is an expression of the self, where we trust ourselves enough to have a connection with the neutral observer, the planet, the Akashic record, and self-life experience to make understandings about how other beings work without violating their sovereign abilities by using our psychic abilities to perceive who they are and use it against them. Unity is an expression where hierarchical order, the I am presence, suddenly understands I am at the peak of the hierarchical order, and the system of domination and control that is out there is not an I am presence, and I do not have to have contracts with it.
I want to continue this in our next show, so we're going to basically carry over into our next episode. We're going to talk about where we are, basically in the timeline, the end of the timeline wars that is supposed to be approaching, the absolution of our karmic debts, and ultimately, more recent history, I suppose, leading up to it. So let's wrap this up for now, but we will come back. So we will come back with more Andrew Bartzis. Stick around for the next episode.